Before we begin the debate, I do want to add one thing about league resources that may be available that some of you might find useful. We've got a new website, votect2016.org. It is a link to many resources, to the Secretary of State's website, to voting information, and to some of our new publications, including pamphlets on how to get a permanent absentee ballot and what a new voter can expect to find at the polls when he or she votes for the first time. So if you have somebody who might benefit from them, I recommend the site strongly. By luck of the draw, in the 151st District debate, which starts the evening, Mr. Camillo will go first on the first question, and Ms. Bargava will go second. On the second question, she will go first, and he will go second, and we will alternate back and forth. Questions have been submitted by the audience, but if you have more, please feel free to send them on to the screening committee, which is over there, and there should be cards and pencils on everybody's seat. Each candidate will have 1.5 minutes to answer each question, and half a minute, 30 seconds, to rebut if they want. The rebuttal may be a direct contradiction of the other candidate, or it may be an extension of their own prior remarks. If the candidates or I feel that additional rebuttal is necessary, additional 30-second rebuttal will be allowed. If everybody is clear on that, first question to Mr. Camillo first. What qualifies you to represent the 151st District?
Thank you, Jean, and good evening to everybody. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. I know it's a tough night. There's a school open house, public school open houses, and they're roasting our friend and First Selectman Peter Tessie, so thank you for being here. Excuse me, what qualifies me to be a state representative for the 151st District? I was born and raised in Coscop, Connecticut. I was a small businessman for over 20 years. I was a history teacher in high school for a year. I was in real estate. I was a banker for several years. Civically, I was on the RTM for 3.5 terms. I was the chairman of the Board of Parks and Recreation in Greenwich for a few years. I was the chairman of the Republican Town Committee, served on many boards and commissions, and still do today. In Hartford, I am the assistant Republican leader, one of them. I am the ranking House member on the Commerce Committee. I am the founder and co-chair of the nation's first ever Animal Welfare Caucus. I am the founder and co-chair of the Catholic Roundtable, which is open to legislators of all faiths. I am on the Manufacturing Caucus, the Long Island Sound Caucus, the IDD Caucus for individuals with developmental disabilities. I am on the Tourism Caucus, and I was named to the Commission on Economic Competitiveness and a former panel member on the task force for distracted driving, which followed a bill that I introduced that became law on distracted driving in the state. And I'd like to eventually talk about some of the bills that I've introduced that have become law. Thank you.
For hosting this forum tonight, and I'd like to thank my opponent, Fred Camillo, for engaging in this important discussion. My family and I moved to Greenwich 9 years ago because we wanted to start a family. And what better place to start a family than this beautiful town that has great parks, safety, great schools, and we have loved every minute of it since. I spent 20 years in the financial sector as a hedge fund portfolio manager and trader. And in December, I decided to leave the industry to really fully engage in civic responsibilities. After I had my kids, it took me back to a place when I was a child myself, in a family where my mom was a single immigrant parent and we struggled with basic necessities. And I felt so lucky and fortunate that I have the comforts in life that I do and that my children do as well. But there are so many families who continue to struggle. And so I felt a calling towards civic engagement. So I sit on the board of non-for-profit organizations that help empower community, help gender parity, and help cultural awareness. And then I really felt like if I had a voice in policy, that I could really fully move the needle as much as possible in terms of enacting positive change. And that's when I decided to run for office.
Okay, anything further, Mr. Camillo? Anything further? All right. Next question goes to Ms. Bargava first. In an effort to balance the state budget, we are seeing serious and significant cuts to many agencies. If elected, what, if anything, would you do to reduce the trend of cuts in state aid to nonprofits?
So I have knocked on over 3,000 doors in my district, and it is very sad to me, the stories that I'm hearing about people either leaving our town and state, thinking of leaving, or not finding it affordable. As a director and as a board member for several nonprofit organizations, I feel the pain of the cuts that are going on across the board for nonprofits, and also the affordability for a lot of families, and it breaks my heart. So I would like to use my skills, my private sector skills, to go up to Hartford to help restore fiscal responsibility, and also to bring businesses back to the state, because I really think the crust of the problem lies in the fact that our fiscal situation is dire, and we need to fix it right there. And everything else, no matter whether it's high taxes or cuts to services or cuts to education that we've seen, it all factors back up to the fact that the state is broke. And that's where I'm going to bring my private sector experience and really start there. Some of the things that I would like to see: stronger alliances between business, private sector, and universities, investing in transportation, infrastructure, and education, long-term investments that have long-term payoffs, entice businesses to move to Connecticut, as I mentioned, and make sure that we keep our university graduates to stay in Connecticut and work in Connecticut so that we grow our population.
Thank you. Mr. Camillo?
Thank you for the question. We have, on the Republican side, not just voted no to the Democrats' budgets, but we have offered alternatives. We have offered alternatives that did not raise taxes and also flat-funded the towns. There were no cuts. We also, in our budget, restored all the funding to the developmentally disabled and other social services. How do we get there? Well, we've been calling for, and some of the reasons why we've been voting against the budgets of the majority party is none of them, including the last one, the last deficit mitigation bill, is there were no long-term structural changes. What we're proposing, and I think now the governor is starting to listen and agree with us, is we're to put a bonding on our cap, a cap on our bonding, and also to prioritize our bonding. So, for example, we would put $70 billion towards transportation. The governor had $100 billion transportation. That's not going to happen. But $70 billion is doable under ours. We also have pension reform. We're one of the worst states. We're funded at 42%. We would not count overtime towards pensions. We would vote on union contracts, which we don't do now. They kick into effect after 30 days. And we did other things, but also help the working class by restoring the property tax credit that is now down to $200. Thank you.
Okay, anything further?
Yes. So the Republican budget that was proposed, I just want to say, the biggest cuts that they wanted were to transportation and infrastructure and education, completely opposite to what we should be doing. Those are long-term investments that have long-term payoffs. And I appreciate the fact that my opponent is passionate about the budget, but he didn't vote on the budget this year. And to me, that was the single most important piece of legislation that went through, and he wasn't there. I plan to be a big part of solving our fiscal issues. For that, we need to show up to vote.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Camillo?
Yes. My opponent brought up the 2015 budget. This year, I actually had 100% attendance. My first 4 or 5 years up there, I was 99% attendance on my votes. In 2013, I was ill, and I missed about 3 months, and even then, my attendance was 71%. Because of that, that illness, last year I had a couple of bouts where I had to go to the hospital. And on the day that my opponent referred to the missed vote, it was a day before my birthday, and I woke up and I was having dizzy spells, and I decided to go because I was afraid they were going to bring the budget out. I stayed till 3:10 in the morning, almost 24 hours, and they were 24 votes short, and I was told, just go home and we'll get back in the morning. When I came back in the morning, they had voted by 11 o'clock, but I did not duck the vote.
Okay. Next question goes to Mr. Camillo first. What are the 3 most pressing issues facing the state in the next year and beyond?
Thank you for the question. Again, it comes back to the budget. I understand my opponent had mentioned to a few people around the district that the issues have changed since in 2008. They have not changed. They've actually gotten worse. On the Commerce Committee, where Senator France and I are ranking members, we have actually done something that the state has not done ever. In 2011, we started getting inserted into our clauses with these companies that we're given millions of dollars to, a clause that we call the Joe Calico clause that would actually repay the taxpayers when these companies who are receiving funds hit it big. Remicade in New York kicked back $3 billion to the state of New York after they hit it big. We've now got it into several of them. We're pushing to get them into every one of them. So the way we structure our deals is number one. Number two, we have to have long-term planning in our budgets, which we do not have right now. It's always a Band-Aid approach. And three, I would look again to transportation, where I've recently testified in Stanford at UConn, and I spoke with the DOT commissioner who agreed to meet with me and Representative Steinberg of Westport to take up my idea about corporate sponsorship of the rail cars to get people off of the roads and to also make mass transit a lot cheaper.
Okay, Ms. Bergava.
So my opponent mentioned the Calico clause. That is, to me, one of the most anti-business ideas that I've seen. The Calico clause would allow the government to have a 50% stake in businesses. Do we really want a government to be governing our businesses? They're there to govern the state. We don't want businesses to be governed by our government. So I would never vote for something where we need less government, not more. But in terms of our issues, I do agree that it is very fiscal, but I do agree, I do stick by what I said before, that what the issues were in 2008 are entirely different after the very severe financial crisis that hit us. Our sectors of financial sector and our defense sector, which were the two sectors that Connecticut heavily relied on, were heavily hit. Financial crises hit the financial sector, then we saw the defense sequestering, and that cut the other sector. And unfortunately, Connecticut did not have a lot of eggs in the basket. And we know that diversification is the way to really hedge ourselves in any type of investment. So I want to bring businesses back to the state. That's what I am, my experience will help me do. I worked with big businesses. I negotiate with big businesses. That's what we need. We need a change. We need a change in Hartford, and that's what I represent.
Any rebuttal?
Yes, please. My opponent just said that it was anti-business to stick the Calico clause in when we're giving millions and millions of dollars. We gave $300 million to a company to bring 300 jobs here in 2011. I was one of 5 Republicans to vote for it because I worked behind the scenes to get that clause in there where once they hit $10 million in a product, then the state becomes a 50% partner. How is that anti-business to pay back the taxpayers who have funded this? And I don't know where you're getting the 50% on all the deals, because each deal is different. Commissioner Catherine Smith likes the idea, but she doesn't think that we can get them in all of them. I disagree, and we're going to keep working on it.
Anything further, Ms. McConnell?
So I'm all about incentivizing businesses, but again, what I will bring to the table is a much better analysis of how those incentivized businesses will help our state, whether they stick to what they said that they will stick to, and break down the numbers more. But I don't believe that our government should be sharing in profit from our businesses. That to me is just not a pro-business thing to do.
Do you want any further rebuttal?
Sure. I have voted for budgets and amendments to budgets that were very pro-business. The 2 highest tax increases in history in the state were in the last 5 years. That was very anti-business. But on the Commerce Committee, which is known as the most pro-business committee in the state legislature, we turn out pro-business things all the time, including the Small Business Express, which we've spent $245 million. They've retained 17,000 jobs and proposed to add another 6,000. it comes out to about $10,000 per job. I think we need to do a little bit better than that, but it's still a very positive, and we
It's
bring.
time. Sorry. Ms. Bargava, anything further?
Yes, so small businesses is a really important place where I think Connecticut should be investing. Really, small businesses is the crust of our economy here in Connecticut, across the country. And I do have to point out that as much as Fred says he's pro-business, he also voted against a bill, HB 5575, which would support the Women's Business Development Corp., an organization that helps women set up small businesses and would have allowed grants to those small businesses. Again, I want to entice these small businesses to survive.
That's time. I'm going to go to the next question. It goes to Ms. Bargava first. Transportation is critical for Fairfield County and the state. What can be done to improve traffic flow here? Specifically, how will you work to alleviate the traffic problems on Route 95?
Thank you. Great question. I moved to Connecticut. I moved to Greenwich because I was a commuter. I was a mom, and I was a working mom, and I had to commute every day for several years. It is so important to me that Greenwich remain an attraction for families to live here and be able to commute to New York City and Stamford and other surrounding areas. So I really want to work on making sure that our MTA is accountable and ensure solid contracts with them so that we keep trains fast, reliable, and affordable. Chronic congestion costs Connecticut businesses $1.6 billion a year in fuel cost and lost productivity. Connecticut ranks very low in the quality of infrastructure, which is another hindrance on business. I want to get our congestion cleaned up as well. How do we do that? Get those trains working faster and get the people out of their cars, and also get the trucks that drive cargo off of our roads. How do we do that? Let's get the rail cargo trains better working, and also we can think about revitalizing Bridgeport by using their ports and getting some of that cargo on ships. These are the sort of out-of-the-box thinking ideas that we need to suggest. Lastly, public-private partnerships are a great way to fund those infrastructure projects. My opponent mentioned a $100 billion Let's Go Connecticut plan. Let's use the private companies to help us with that.
That's time. Mr. Camillo.
Thank you, and I agree, and that's why I've offered again to spearhead the corporate sponsorship of rail cars to get people off of the highways. Two things when it comes to congestion and transportation in Connecticut. When Governor Rell tried to take the state troopers out of the way stations, we fought it and won because it was a public safety issue. And also, they were taking a lot of money when pulling over the trucks. It ended up being a big revenue driver. When Governor Malloy tried it, the legislature let him do it, and I reached out and I found out after the first year we lost a couple $1 million, or a little bit under that. That we need to have, I would return the way stations to the state troopers. Remember, that's the first line of defense for something coming over the line in New York. Also, it brings in more money. Second of all, I voted for the lockbox on the Special Transportation Fund. It's rated every year. And ironically, when I was voting for that the same day in the Democrats' budget, they actually rated it again. I mean, most of them voted for it, but they actually in that they rated it again. So, saying one thing and doing another. But those two things have to be tried. And again, getting back to corporate sponsorship of trains, I think that's we all go to Yankee Stadium, right? We like that. But we go to Citi Field, there's a corporate sponsor. I don't really like it on baseball stadiums, but who has a sentimental attachment to a rail car? You have a captive audience in there, and it's been done in other venues, and I think that's the way to go. Public-private partnerships I've been pushing for a long time, and the commission has agreed to meet with us. Thank
I'm
you.
afraid that's time. Rebuttal?
Yeah, so, corporate sponsorship to me is a short-term solution. We need long-term solutions, and a corporate sponsorship will not make MTA be accountable, ensure that we do have trains that are fast, reliable, and affordable. As far as the wait stations, I agree with that, but really, again, short-term, we need to get the trucks off the road altogether, entice them to drive at night, or entice that cargo to go on freight rails instead. We can't put small bandages on our issues anymore. We need long-term solutions, and that's what I plan to bring to Hartford.
Rebuttal?
Sure. In 2012, they put a 5% increase on the commuters. In 2013, another 5%. In 2014, another 5%. 2015, 1%. This year, 6%. That's why we were down there at the trains getting signatures and testifying at the hearings, because we cannot, if you make the mass transit a lot more affordable for people, they're going to do it. I go to Yankee Stadium now taking the train. It's cheaper and it's better. But if we made it real, almost where it's almost nothing, people are going to go off there. People are committed to their cars. We all are. But again, constantly raising the fares is not the answer.
Time. All right, I'm going to go to the next question. It goes to Mr. Camillo first. Do you believe alternative non-fossil fuels have a future in our state? Which ones? And what is the best way to encourage their use?
Thank you for the question. One alternative energy source is not going to do it. You need a combination of all of them. I have voted for solar bills. We also have a solar pilot program where I believe 20% of the people in the state can avail themselves to the solar panels, but because, almost 80% of the other ones can't, for either because they can't logistically or because they just don't want to. So now they're going to have these these fields where they're sharing the solar and people can buy into it. I think that's a very positive and progressive way to do it. But also trying the other things. I mean, when you go in East Haven, you see that windmill there. I think they're great, and I think it sends a good message to people to see those there. Unfortunately, in a lot of places, people don't like them. I think I remember Senator Kennedy in Massachusetts was a big proponent of that, and then when they wanted to put it in the Nantucket Sound, he was against it. Not in his backyard. So I think we have to be fair in that and be pretty stern, and because again, that is something that will benefit us all, and also geothermal. There's other ones too. As far as fracking goes, I mean, there's a lot of natural gas here. I think if we could put a man on the moon, we can find a way to frack without putting chemicals into the rocks, because that's the big holdup there. But we do have energy independence here. We just have to find out a way to do it, do it in a safe way for everybody in those environments. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Bargava.
So I'm proud of Connecticut that we are green. And we had one of the first green banks in the country, which incentivizes use of green energy, promotes the use of natural gas. As a legislator, I want to continue, if I were to be a legislator, to continue to work on more of investment in green policies. I think investing in companies that are building 21st century cutting-edge technologies that use renewable energy sources, that these investments would be long-term payoffs again. We're looking for long-term solutions. They would create jobs and develop new industries for Connecticut. Again, Fred voted against a bill in 2010, SB 493, that would reduce electricity costs and promote renewable energy. Now, maybe he's changed his mind, but we have to be thinking long-term. If we're going to be up in Hartford, we have to think 5 and 10 years out, because that's where we're going to see the impact. So as a legislator, I want to make sure that we are investing in those companies, that we are thinking long-term, and I'm going to bring my skills to negotiate to make sure that we do get the best deal for our taxpayers.
Rebuttal?
Sure. While I don't recall what was in that bill, just so you know, sometimes you look at a bill's title, that's not the whole story. I had a bill that eventually got passed that was called the distracted driving law. The majority party stripped it for a bill to give licenses to undocumented workers in the state. We went crazy and got the bill back in there, but I voted against that bill, and it would look like I voted against my own bill. So you have to really know that all these bills have other things in there sometimes. My opponent mentioned that I voted against. Thank you.
Any rebuttal, Ms. Bargava?
I think, Fred, it's fine what you've done in the past, but we really need a much stronger policy program in the future. And again, I think investing in 21st century renewable energy technologies will be one that has great payoff. But I do have to say one thing. In the summer, the League of Women Voters hosted their annual picnic, where I met Fred for the first time, and he said something that was very important, that he does not believe in career politicians, that he believes that legislators should have term limits, and that we need fresh blood every now and then. And that's exactly why I'm running.
Okay, time. Yes, if you want rebuttal, go for it.
Yes, I absolutely did say that, and I believe that. I serve with people up there that have been up there for 30 years. They're still very good legislators. I think 30 years is a little long. I've only been up there 4 terms, and I do agree we need new blood. But the state has been a one-party state for 40 years. The Tax Foundation says this is the #1 state you don't want to die in, the #1 state to retire in. We're 44th business-wise. One party, and even when there was a Republican governor, there was a veto-proof majority, and I was up there, and they used it. So we do need new blood, new thinking, but
Time.
Okay.
Sorry, time.
Thank you.
Anything further, Ms. Bargama?
Yeah, so the same way that Fred is arguing that we've had a one-party government for 40 years, we've had a one-party government representing us in Greenwich for over 100 years. And guess what? For the last 40 years, Greenwich hasn't had a voice. We need a moderate-minded Democrat to go up there and actually speak to the other Democrats and have a voice for Democrats and Republicans and our town people in Greenwich, and that's exactly why I'm running. We need a change from this town. We need a voice.
Okay. Thank you both. That's 2 rebuttals, and I think I'm going to go to the next question. This one goes to Ms. Bargava first. If elected, what are your plans to assist in combating Connecticut's heroin epidemic?
Thank you for that extremely important question. Unfortunately, Connecticut ranks 3rd in the amount of deaths that we have seen that have been due to heroin overdose. 700 and some odd people died last year. It's an epidemic, and it's killing our people faster than gunshot wounds, faster than car accidents. It's killing our children and teenagers, but not just that. The biggest growing group of people that are dying of overdose are actually aged 45 to 59. We need serious attention to this program and problem, and introduce programs that will really combat this disease. And so I certainly, it's one of my major platforms is to really work on this issue, make sure that we have Narcan available to all of our EMT workers, and to make sure that we have the right facilities for aftercare, for recovery, which it's surprising that our recoveries, privately owned recovery centers are not regulated at all. These are people who are aiding possibly overdose victims or people who may die at some point from overdose, and they're not regulated. So we need much better oversight from our government, and we need to make sure that medicines are available and affordable, but it is certainly an issue that we cannot ignore.
Okay, Mr. Camillo.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. My opponent did mention Narcan, and I agree, but we just passed a bill that requires that first responders have to be able to administer it. They have to be trained in its use. We also, in that bill, put a limit on prescriptions to 7 days. And those are all positives, but we're losing the battle. And I've been working with Greenwich resident Alex Hillman on this, who has reached out and been studying and in contact with people in Switzerland on how they combat it. And instead of throwing people in jail and not curing them, what they do in Switzerland, and when he first told me this, I was kind of taken aback, but the more I thought about it and the more information I got, I think it's worth a try. Basically, they would take the addicts into hospitals in a controlled setting and wean them off it. So give it to them in a controlled setting, wean them off it. And I said, well, what are the statistics? And so far, everything coming back is saying that they're more and more getting cured of it that way rather than throwing them in jail. What we're doing right now is not working. So we're losing that battle. And I think I plan to meet with Alex in the next few weeks and before next session, God willing, to work on that, because I think we have to think outside the box on that. And if there's a blueprint somewhere else where it's working, then I think we need to go down that road. Thank you.
Anything further, Ms. Markova?
So I don't know much about what the issues are in Switzerland, but I do feel like in the United States it's one of the most available drugs than in any other country. So we need a much stronger rebuttal than I think a European country would need. It is killing 700 people last year. It's a real problem, and we have to be extremely aggressive on attacking it, all three: prevention, rescue, and treatment. And we need to attack it on every end, and I want to look at all solutions.
Anything further, Mr. Camillo?
No, I think, I don't disagree with that, but I think, why not? If it's working somewhere else, I don't think we're that unique that we couldn't look into it more deeply. But again, the law we passed last year is a good first step.
Okay, next question goes to Mr. Camillo first. The Citizens Election Program gives money to candidates for state office. Should the program be continued, modified, or ended?
Thank you. I was not a fan of that program. I don't think people's tax dollars should be going towards placards and bumper stickers. But when I first ran in 2008, I found out that if I didn't take it and I raised $50,000, my opponent would get $50,000. They changed it in 2010. No one knew about that, and I asked when my opponent declined public financing and was raising money privately. So I did not know that they had changed that. But I have seen one thing, and I've kind of grew to respect the program in that it took money out of the politics from corporations, and unfortunately, it was put back in when Governor Malloy ran in 2014 because they feared Tom Foley was going to outspend him with his own money. So they ended up allowing expenditures from outside to come back in. But for the most part, it's been clean. There have been some problems. People have got in trouble, but they have, for the most part, it's been clean. Again, when we're in a budget shortfall and the governor and others are proposing to cut social services, I think we can do without it. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Bargava.
So I respect Connecticut tremendously for trying to keep our election process clean. My opponent did vote against Citizens Election Program, but did tap into it. I did not tap into it. Even though most Democrats do, I decided not to, because again, I am very concerned and moved by the fact that services are being cut, the ones that we talked about earlier. Education funding is being cut. And if I can afford to find a way to support my campaign and not tap into the $12 million odd that's spent on the Citizen Elections Program, then I wanted to do that. But I find it interesting that Fred did vote against it, has spoken out against it for the same reasons why I didn't take it, but then did tap into it.
Rebuttal?
Absolutely. Those were the rules. I did not create those rules, and certainly all my opponents were taken advantage of. I did not know that you were going to do that, but certainly that's your right. But we have put, and I have supported, amendments to get rid of it, and to put, in fact, we were going to take money from that and the unclaimed bottle deposits and put it into parks last year, and we were just going to take about $4 million from that, and our amendment was voted down on a party line. And what happened? The fees in the state parks went up because of that. So I have.
Time. Sorry.
Thank you. Sorry.
Further rebuttal, Ms. Bargava?
Sure. I'm just going to say one thing, and I really do think as a leader you lead by example, and that's what I plan to do in Hartford, is lead by example, stick to my principles, and really, lead the way for the rest of the citizens of this country.
Anything further, Mr. Camillo?
Yes. My whole career in Hartford and here in Greenwich has been driven by principle. I did not put these rules in effect. Certainly, if I knew you were not going to take it, I wouldn't have taken it this year. But every other Democrat was that I've run against, and most in the state do. So that's okay. I mean, I think it has been a clean program. I respect it for that. But when we're in a perfect world, it's fine. But right now, when we're in a budget crisis, and for the next 4 and 5 out years, we may be looking at $10 billion in deficit, then it has to go, and the money has to go somewhere else where people are really, truly more vulnerable, most vulnerable, and stop the
Sorry.
game.
Yeah, sorry. Anything further, Ms. Bargava?
Well, I just want to add that we actually are in a very dire budget problem right now. I mean, of course, it could be worse in 10 years. I can't even imagine where Connecticut will be if it is that worse. So we are very much in a dire budget problem right now. That's exactly why I'm running, and that's exactly why we need a change of voice and new blood up in Hartford to get us out of that dire situation. where it won't be a problem for anyone to tap into the citizen election program.
Okay, I'm going to go to the next question. It goes to Ms. Bargava first. Do you think that Connecticut's gun safety laws go far enough? And would you support increased restrictions on open carry?
So, again, I'm very proud of Connecticut that we are the second safest gun safety state in the country, and therefore the fourth least amount of gun-related deaths in our state. But yes, absolutely, we need to keep our communities safe. One of the reasons why my family moved here is because it is such a safe town. It's a safe state, and of course, we want to progressively keep our citizens safe in this state and in this country. So absolutely, that's one of the first piece of legislation policies that I will want to work on is to eliminate open carry. There was an article in the Stamford Advocate about a mom and her child in the pet store in Stamford, where a man was standing there with a revolver just hanging out, and the child asked, why does he have a gun? There's no reason for that. I think it's an invasion on people's liberties and also their feeling of being able to protect their child or feel safe. There's no reason why someone should have to open carry. I absolutely respect the Second Amendment, but keep the guns at home, keep them locked up, keep our communities safe.
Mr. Camillo.
When we had the tragedy in Newtown in 2012, the gunman that Tuesday went to Danbury to get a gun. He was refused. Our laws worked. Where the laws failed was the background checks did not incorporate who you live with. And I would never deny anybody one gun, no matter who they lived with, if it was for self-protection. But when we were, that was when I had been taken ill, but I was still following what was going on, and I was reaching out to the people on the gun panel, and I received a call from a former policeman in Fort Apache in the Bronx, who's now a judge, and he's a Democrat. And he said, Freddie, whatever you do, because I'm not a 30, 40-round guy, and I don't believe you need AK-47s. He said, but whatever you do, do not vote to disarm the citizenry. Because I was a cop, and when there were riots in the city, in our neighborhoods, we were often told to pull back, leaving those people in their neighborhoods with nothing to protect themselves unless they had a gun. You remember the 92 riots in Los Angeles, and you saw the people on the buildings with their guns. Those were the only, and they didn't shoot anybody, those were the only buildings that weren't burned. So I absolutely believe in the Second Amendment. I do believe in strong background checks. That's probably why the NRA doesn't give me great marks every 2 years. But I'm a strong believer in the Second Amendment.
Okay, rebuttal?
So I just want to point out that October, as many of you know, is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And unfortunately, domestic violence is one of the most investigated crimes in Greenwich. And often domestic violence and gun violence go hand in hand. My opponent, again, voted against a domestic violence bill, HB 5246, which would aid rape crisis centers and shelter victims of domestic violence abuse. Donald Trump's latest comments portray predatory, lewd behavior. He is suggesting that a person of celebratory power and leadership gives him the right to assault a woman.
Time.
I worked with a sea of men on the
Time.
trading floor.
Time. Audience, I'm going to ask, keep it down. Thank you. Rebuttal?
Yes, thank you. I would hope that my opponent would stick to this race and not try to deflect and distract from the issues that are important to the voters here. The bill, again, the bill you're talking about, I need to see more of it. We vote on over 400 or 500 bills a year. We see a couple thousand. But there was a restraining order bill last year that I voted for because we worked a compromise in there. God bless you. Where if there's a restraining order against somebody and the police come and they take their gun for a cooling off period. I was okay with that.
Time. I'm afraid.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to drop this one here, okay. Next question goes to Mr. Camillo first. What steps should Connecticut be taking to protect its coastal towns and cities from the effects of global warming, such as flooding and erosion?
Thank you. Well, there was a bill, several years ago, that would not allow people on the coastal towns to rebuild after one storm, which I voted against, and we all did. If people have the money to rebuild their homes, they should be able to do that, and the government shouldn't tell them tell them no. But the question is kind of open-ended. God bless you. Could you tell me a little bit more as far as, you want a policy as far as global warming, or you're talking about, I don't know how you protect against a 100-year storm. I mean, I don't know how to answer that unless I get a little bit more information. I'm sorry.
The question was what I got. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, Ms. Bargava?
So I think, again, investing in energy sources in our environment is one that I would like to pursue because I think it has long-term payoffs. You know, storm remediation and flooding, for instance, is something that I think every town, especially on our coastal areas, that our towns should be investing in. But where do we get the funds in that? And that's it. All of these things roll up, or a lot of these things roll up to the problem in Hartford that we just don't have the funds to address a lot of these issues. And that's where I feel we have to concentrate our efforts on, is fixing those fiscal issues in Hartford so that we have the resources to protect our people, to protect from storms, to protect, to make sure that we are investing in remediation and flooding. And that's where my skills will come very handy, because I plan to get to the crust of that problem.
Anything further?
Sure. My opponent keeps saying that she's going to go up there and change her party's direction after 40 years. There are Democrats in Stanford that were punished for voting against the tax hike in 2007. There were Milford Democrats that voted and were punished a couple of years ago for voting against tax hikes. The former state senator Bill Nickerson said in 2008, well, they bring this up every 2 years, which may be moot in the next 2 or 4 years because the Republicans have picked up 27 seats and there's no more supermajority. But Bill Nickerson said, if you see two people rowing down the river in the wrong direction, why would you give them another oar?
That's time. That's time. Guys, come on, please keep it down. Anything further on this, Ms. Bargava?
So those people clapping must be Trump supporters. Sorry, I have to throw that in. But, I worked on a trading floor with a sea of men, and I'm used to fighting, and I'm used to being heard. And I don't know what Fred means by them being punished. I'm not a politician. No one can punish me. I'm just here to make change in Hartford and really make a better life and better environment for all of us and all of our futures.
Okay, anything further, Mr. Camillo?
Sure. What I mean by being punished is, in 2007, the Rich Forum lost funding. They lost more ECS funding. Some of the Democrats in Milford after redistricting, had their districts become more Republican because they had a supermajority and they could do that then. I can tell you, when I have voted against my party on certain issues, I have never been called to an office. I never had my parking space taken away. Things are a little different up there. So absolutely, we need new direction in this state, but not the kind that my opponent's talking about.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to the next question. It is not one that I wanted to ask, but a number of you have asked it in remarkably similar form. So there's apparently some audience interest. It goes to Ms. Bargava first. Who do you support for U.S. President and why?
It's a very important question. The U.S. President not only governs our country, but our state and our town. It's very important. They set an example for all of us. I have fought passionately for many years to advocate for gender parity. For over 2 decades, I was one of the only women in my job of trading. I'm an electrical engineer, graduated one of 5 women and over 100 people, and I've started an organization with some other women in Greenwich, a nonprofit that helps to promote gender parity and educate legislators and leaders about the importance of gender parity. Our community is full of warm-hearted people who have mutual respect for one another. When I think about the hateful, lewd rhetoric that Donald Trump exhibits time and time again against women, against race, against our servicemen, against the disabled, it frightens me. I cannot imagine a world for our kids. My kids are sitting right here, where I feel like I have to protect them from our country's leader. Under his leadership, our society will be taking 10 moral steps backwards instead of 1 forward. So I ask you, Fred, you are still supporting Trump. Can you tell me what I tell my 2 children when they ask me what part of Trump's conduct or temperament they should model? How do I answer them? His crude predatory misogyny, his Islamophobia, his bigotry, his mocking of those with disabilities, his draft dodging, his failure to pay taxes for 15 years, his lying about his position on the Iraqi war, his taking advantage of September 11th victims. What shall I tell them?
All right.
And I noticed that my opponent is reading off a prepared note, so she was ready for that question, obviously.
Of course, you should be too.
Well, you can come here. There's nothing in front of me. My opponent is going around the district because people have told me, including Democrats have told me, that she's tying me to Trump, randomly tying me to Donald Trump when she is wholeheartedly connected to Hillary Clinton. And she bragged about she raises money for her up in her house in the back country. She's an ambassador for the Clinton
Costco.
Foundation. I could talk for an hour about Hillary Clinton and how I think she has abused her position and the public trust and enriching herself, putting the national security at risk. Scooter Libby went to jail for 30 months for something that she did. She had 5 people who were subpoenaed by the FBI who could have shed light on this, were granted immunity for nothing in return. I don't want this to turn into a Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump discussion. This is a disservice to the people you seek to represent. I'm here tonight to talk about my record, because we can only account for our own records. I was told this was going to happen 5 months ago with my opponent. She had no record in Greenwich. I have a record. People know me, and they trust me. Throwing things against the wall and trying to tie me to Donald Trump when you knew darn well from the 3 articles that have been in the paper that from the beginning I was not a Donald Trump supporter. I supported Marco Rubio. I ended up endorsing John Kasich in the primary. But I am sure as heck not going to vote for Hillary Clinton.
So you are supporting Trump.
I am going to exercise moderator's privilege and not allow rebuttal on this one. This next question goes to Mr. Camillo first. Boy, are we getting hot-button issues. Should marijuana be legalized to collect the tax money?
Thank you. It's a great question. I've had the opportunity to vote on 2 marijuana-related bills. One was medicinal, which I voted for, and one was a decrim bill, which made it a very, very small penalty. I ended up voting against that, but I do understand both sides of that bill, question. That night when we were debating the decrim bill, I actually called former police chief David Rydberg, got his take on it. I reached out to Jeff Berger, our state representative, Democrat, former cop, and Joe Varengia, who's a Democrat and was a cop at the time. And they were their experts in this. The bill had some merits, but in the end, they gave me really, I think, enough to go on to vote against, but I certainly would keep an open mind on it. I again, did vote for medicinal marijuana, but certainly I don't think we should be trying to balance the budget by making drugs legal.
All right, Ms. Bargava.
So unfortunately, the epidemic, the heroin epidemic, really started because insurance companies were putting the pressure on doctors and putting their backs against the wall and rating them in the 90s as to how well they were pain managing, forcing them almost to prescribe prescription pills to their patients. And really, the drug cartels in Mexico were silently watching this unfold, and as our society became addicted to painkillers, they flood our country and our states with cheap heroin. I really think we need to hold drug companies accountable and also hold care providers accountable for the amount of pills that they are allowed to disperse. And there's a lot of work being done on this. Senator Blumenthal has been a big advocate and big help to help pass those policies. So I do think that we should have alternative ways to pain manage, and marijuana for those purposes makes sense. I don't know enough about the repercussions or the pros and cons, but generally I want to continuously find ways for people to be able to deal with that, with their pains, without being forced to rely on addictive painkillers.
Anything further, Mr. Camillo?
No, I would agree with that, and I would keep an open mind on it, not wanting again to. Same thing with gambling. We don't want to, vote for casino expansion just because of revenue. I think we can. The way to do that is through, as Senator France would tell you, is economic development. Thank you.
Okay, anything further, Ms. Bargava?
No.
Okay. Next question goes to Ms. Bargava first. Will you support full funding of the state's open space preservation programs?
So again, to me, supporting extra costs is actually, I'm not going to answer that question because I really would like to look at the entire budget and have a voice on the entire budget before I start supporting specific legislation for funding. I'm going to go back to the fact that Connecticut has an issue with its revenue base and an issue with its structural deficit, and that's where the problem lies. The same way I don't want to tap into CEP because we are cutting services across the board. We are cutting educational funding. We are driving people out of our state, and as we do, that problem becomes bigger and bigger because we have less of a tax base, paying those bills. We have to reverse that trend, and that's what I want to do. I want to bring the revenues back and then spend those revenues wisely, and also make sure that we use predictions as to what the future looks like before we spend. No one should be spending taxpayers' money the way they wouldn't run their own households. And I think that there's been irresponsible decisions that have been made in Hartford over years. But I do think, as a Democrat, I will have a much better voice for all of us in Greenwich because they will listen to me instead of shutting me out at the door, and they will take my experience, and I will form an alliance between Republicans and Greenwich Democrats to really come up with the good ideas and make a change.
Time. Okay, Mr. Camillo.
Yes, and I agree, and that's exactly how I legislate up there, looking at every bill, and that's why I have a lot of no votes sometimes. Talking about, I don't know where to go. I'll pass on this one. I'm going to I know we're going to try and stay on the subject here, and I don't want to go over my 2 minutes, so I'll save it for. Can I tack it on at the end?
Well, we're getting to the end, and it's closing statements coming up. All right. I am going to ask one more question, and then we will go to closing statements. Yeah. And this one goes to Mr. Camillo first. Would you be willing to reopen government employee contracts to renegotiate the terms?
That's a great question. Believe it or not, coming from a Republican, this may sound odd, I believe once you shake your hand and you give your word on a deal, you really shouldn't go back and reopen it. That being said, I have supported going forward that all new hires would go to a defined contribution rather than defined benefit. The Democrats have rejected that so far. All new hires going forward, not reopening it. Because again, if you give your word and you sit down in good faith with somebody, even if you don't like the deal, you've given your word, and your word is your bond. And when you're up there, if you once you go back on your word, then the other side, whether it's in the case of the unions, which normally don't support Republicans up there, there's no trust. So I don't agree with reopening agreements, but going forward, you have to be forward-thinking, and you have to, in our Republican 5-year budget, we're not looking at billion-dollar deficits, we're looking at a surplus. And one of those things is, going forward, requiring us to vote on union contracts and not just letting them take effect 30 days later. Not counting overtime into your pensions. I mean, look what happened to Detroit. And Connecticut is number 2 or number 1 to Illinois on a lot of issues, including unfunded liabilities, the pension indebtedness. We cannot keep going in this direction. Again, we have voted constantly against this and offered alternatives.
Time, I'm afraid. Ms. Bargava.
So the pension overhang is one of the biggest problems, really, that we are facing in Hartford. And again, it's one of the big reasons why I think that I'm a strong candidate, because I do have 20 years of experience in finance. I've already started to speak to other people in the industry in finance here in Greenwich and coming up with real solutions to how to creatively address those pension issues. We need to, I agree with Fred, we need to modernize contracts, more in line with the private sector, health benefits more in line with the private sector, common sense solutions. And common sense solutions and pragmatic solutions is exactly what I plan to bring to the table. And I'm a different type of Democrat. So it's not about party lines for me. It never has been, because I'm not a politician. To me, it's about getting the job done. I want to work with Republicans and Democrats and come up with the best solutions, but I will have a seat at the table for us, and that's where the big difference lies between me and my Republican opponent. He may have good ideas. He's not being heard. And where does it get us? Nowhere. We pay 11% of all of the state taxes. We get no voice, and we get nothing back. And I'm tired of the dynamic. I'm sure all of you are tired of that dynamic. It's time to change.
All right, I'm going to exercise moderator's privilege because we are coming up on the hour. And I'm going to say on this one, no rebuttal. I apologize.
Okay.
By toss of the coin, Mr. Camillo gets the first close.
Oh, I thought it was the second.
No.
Okay. I want to again thank the League of Women Voters and everybody who showed up here tonight to listen to the debate. It has truly been an honor and a pleasure to serve the district that I grew up in and to be their voice in Hartford at the Capitol. In the past 8 years, I've learned two things that my dad, my late father, was a drill instructor, taught me. In life, you have your word, which is essential to get anything done, and you have your record. And the record shows that for 8 years, I have reached across the aisle to get much needed legislation done that are benefiting our residents in the 151st District, the town, and the state. And the record shows that I have written, introduced, and gained passage into law, and signed by governors of both parties, laws that have helped significantly our volunteers, including one that gives Connecticut the strongest volunteer protection law in the country. The record shows that I have introduced legislation, written and introduced legislation that has helped our consumers. The record shows that I have helped introduce legislation that has helped our vehicle drivers and our passengers, and of course, our animal friends. And the record shows that the good people in the 151st District have had 24/7 access to their state representative for these past 8 years, and I'd have it no other way. So, God bless you. So tonight, I want to thank them again for truly the honor of a lifetime, and I respectfully and humbly ask them for their vote on November 8th. Thank you all, and God bless.
Thank you. Ms. Bargava.
So I would like to start with thanking the League of Women Voters, the audience for your questions, Fred, and my two kids, 7- and 6-year-old, who have stood by my side throughout the campaign. Connecticut is at a crossroads. Many Democrats in Hartford may not agree with me on how dire our economic outlook is. However, after knocking on over 3,000 doors and listening to the concerns and struggles of our residents, it is clear to me how critically we need change. Retirees who have lived in Greenwich their entire lives simply find it unaffordable to live here anymore. Young families who have found better job opportunities in other states are also leaving. I'm running for state representative because I believe in this town and it's time for change. We can no longer rely on increasing taxes to pay our bills. This is driving the people out. Rather, we need to bring businesses back to our state and grow our revenues organically. After speaking to small and large companies, it is clear to me that there is a disconnect between businesses and government. I plan to strengthen alliances between private sector, government, and universities in efforts to create an ecosystem that is much more business-friendly. As a daughter of a single immigrant mom who struggled to support a family of 4, I will continue to work hard for our girls, our women, our families, and communities, always guided by strong moral compass. As a board member for several nonprofit organizations, I have worked to enhance cultural awareness, help underserved communities, and promote gender parity. Solving the problems of our state will be challenging, but I'm a fighter, and it is time for fresh ideas. We cannot keep sending the same people up to Hartford hoping for a different outcome. Today's challenges are entirely different from the ones we faced in 2008. Connecticut's fiscal situation is the most important challenge facing our state, and I have the right skills to do it. As a woman trader and portfolio manager, I succeeded by always working harder than my peers. I will bring that fighting spirit to Hartford and make sure that Greenwich is heard. I will fight for that change in our state that we so critically need, but I can't do that without your support, and so tonight I respectfully ask you for your vote.
Thank you. Thank you, both candidates from the 151st.